Ken.
Perfect. Thanks, Jesse, for inviting me to talk, and I hope everybody's not too close to lunch to absorb a little bit more biological control information. I'm a research scientist out in Agassiz, BC on the coast. I work closely with several of the other presenters who you've heard from today, including Pierre and his group, as well as Tracy, and then we work with the folks in the interior as well on this big biological control project. Also my new colleague out in Agassiz, who's a berry entomologist who you'll probably be hearing from, Dr. Michelle Franklin, and both provincial entomologists in the interior and on the coast, and then ES Crop Consult also, who you heard from earlier today. So, we've already heard from Howard and Chandra and Pierre about how when we're thinking about managing spotted-winged Drosophila, it's not only in the crops that we need to think about managing them. Obviously, the main method of management in crops, along with all the cultural techniques that have been discussed, are insecticide sprays. But just managing the populations that are in the crop doesn't take out a big chunk of the population, because the flies, got ahead of myself there, the flies are moving in between the crop habitats and these adjacent non-crop habitats that have wild fruit in them. And so we rely on biological control, hopefully, to try to suppress the populations of the flies that are in parts of the landscape outside of crop fields. So that's another message I want to add on to from the other presentations, is that to have landscape-wide management of spotted-winged Drosophila, there has to be control happening not only in crop fields, but outside. The problem, as we've been discussing, is that up until a few years ago, there weren't any really specific and effective natural enemies of spotted-winged Drosophila in these non-crop environments, which is a fairly typical situation for an invasive species. So I'll back up sort of the history of what Pierre talked about these two species of Asian parasitoids that are now present in coastal BC. So we know that up until at least 2016 or 2017, there weren't any specialized parasitoids attacking spotted-winged Drosophila in North America. So it was a surprise in 2019. This was actually when we were looking for the viruses that Jan talked about. We noticed that there were parasitoid wasps crawling all over the outside of berries that were infested by spotted-winged Drosophila in Agassiz and several other sites across the lower mainland. We knew this wasn't really supposed to be happening based on past research. There's the size of the wasp relative to a blackberry there. So we sent them away to get identified by experts, and we were really surprised to find out that they were these two species of Asian parasitoids that were being considered for classical biological control of spotted-winged Drosophila, and had been studied so much by the European and United States research groups. And actually, at this point, Ganaspis brasiliensis, this one, the Samba wasp, was actually very close to nearing approval for release in the United States against spotted-winged Drosophila. But we found for the first time in North America that these two species are actually already established here. We, of course, don't know how they got here. This is something that's happening more and more throughout the world, is that not only are invasive pests coming in, but so are their biocontrol agents without intentional introductions. It's easy to imagine potentially that with introductions of spotted-winged Drosophila from Asia, some of those end up being parasitized when they come in. So in 2019, when we did surveys, Pierre already showed you this map, but basically we found that both species are present throughout the lower mainland, although we didn't see too much of the more specific one, the Ganaspis, but we saw them sort of from Vancouver to Hope, and then also on Vancouver Island. But we didn't really know anything other than that they're present. And obviously what we're more interested in, what are they going to mean for how we manage spotted-winged Drosophila? So in 2020, despite all of our limitations, we wanted to get a handle on a couple questions. The first was, are these parasitoids, we know they're present, but are they actually really well established and widespread in British Columbia on the coast? Where, when, on what host plants, and in what level are they attacking spotted-winged Drosophila? And ultimately we want to know, and it's going to take more than 1 year of data to do this, but this is a starting point in figuring out whether these parasitoids are going to have low, medium, very high potential to help suppress spotted-winged Drosophila in natural habitats that serve as sources for crop infestation, and hopefully bring population levels down as much as possible across the entire landscape. Okay, so this summer in 2020, sort of working out of our garages mostly because of limited access to the research centers, we went, several of our teams coordinated to do surveys in different types of natural habitats, the kinds of habitats that would serve as sources for buildup of spotted wing populations. And then Tracy Hueppelsheuser's group working with ES Crop Consult, also coordinated surveys in a number of commercial crop fields in the Abbotsford Langley region, and also the hedgerows that are growing along the sides of those crop fields. So we have these unmanaged sites in orange, distributed across the lower mainland, and then we have the managed sites, which are all clustered in this gray area here. This is what some of the unmanaged sites look like, and this is a good illustration of how we have staggered fruiting of the non-crop host plants. Here are some red elderberry. This is probably in early July, because the Himalayan blackberry here, you can see the buds are starting to bud and flower. That's a community garden in Abbotsford. This is Dr. Michelle Franklin's backyard in Maple Ridge that has a bunch of mixed plants growing that's our hosts for spotted wing Drosophila. This is our experimental farm in Agassiz that this summer especially had a number of unsprayed berry fields, as well as adjacent hedgerows and natural habitats. So very quickly, our methods, we had these 6 unmanaged sites, the 8 managed grower sites. Throughout the entire fruiting period of as many crop and non-crop host plants as we could sample at these sites, we sampled them every 4 to 10 days repeatedly throughout the entire infestation period from May to October. We took several pseudo-replicates at different places within the sites for about 650 total samples, and then we incubated them in these containers here on the top right, and we counted the number of spotted wing Drosophila that came out and the number of parasitoids that came out. And remember, every parasitoid that comes out represents a dead spotted wing Drosophila that was killed by that parasitoid. So then we can calculate what percentage of the spotted wing Drosophila larvae in that sample were killed by parasitoids, and that's the kind of data that I'm going to show you here for the rest of the presentation. So I was actually really surprised by our findings. We knew they were present, these parasitoids, but we thought maybe one species was less common, but it turns out these are the unmanaged sites. So you can see we have parks, wetlands, forests, community gardens, experimental farms, a huge range of habitats. And across all these habitats, both species of parasitoids were present. They commonly killed spotted wing Drosophila at levels between 10 and 20%, which I was really impressed with. And both species seem to work together at all the sites that we surveyed. And so if I had told you that, a couple of years ago that there would be something that's consistently killing between 10 and 20% of spotted wing Drosophila across the entire landscape, I think we would all be pretty happy with that. And this is another piece of good news. Spotted wing is on so many different host plants, and you can imagine that if the parasitoids only attack it on some of them, that's probably bad news because it means there would be refuges for spotted wing Drosophila. But the good news is that we found that both of these parasitoid species, on pretty much every host plant species we surveyed that was infested by spotted wing Drosophila, both of the species were present. So you can see that's on things like crop plants like blueberry, cultivated blackberry, raspberry, strawberry, and all these different non-crop host plants that are in the landscape around it. It was only on plants that we didn't sample very much that we sometimes didn't find one of the parasitoid species. And this graph is going to show you again the percentage of spotted wing Drosophila killed by parasitoids of the 2 main species. But now we're looking at different host plants averaged across the sites where we sampled them. And then again, we have the Ganaspis in orange and the Leptopilina in the blue. And this is to show you that pretty much the entire season, on salmonberry, which are usually the first non-crop host plant to fruit in the landscape here in coastal BC, all the way to Himalayan blackberry, which is the last non-crop host plant to fruit, we consistently see the parasitoids present. We see the highest parasitism levels typically in mid-season fruits like elderberry and raspberry. But again, we see that both of these parasitoid species are working together to kill relatively significant percentages, sometimes as many as a quarter on average, but we sometimes see much higher levels of spotted wing Drosophila. We saw maximum parasitism in some samples of up to 80%. Now we're going to very quickly look at farm sites. Jesse, how much time do I have left here?
You got like 7 minutes.
Okay, awesome. So now these are the farm sites that were sampled by Tracy Hueppelsheuser's team and ES Crop Consult. And now we're going to look in these graphs at what percentage, how many spotted wing Drosophila were parasitoids killing within crop fields. So we're going to start with blueberries that were sampled. There were 3 sites that had some spotted wing infestation. If you can see the legend there on the left, the white part of the bars is how many spotted wing came out of the samples, and then the blue and the colored part of the bars in blue and orange are how many of the 2 parasitoid species came out. So you can see in blueberries, within blueberry fields at these 3 grower sites, it's really, really disappointing. Very, very few of the spotted wing within these fields are killed by the parasitoids. Raspberries, even worse. Almost no parasitoid or almost no spotted wing within these crop fields are killed by the parasitoids. Strawberries, which are later season and tend to have higher spotted wing pressure. Notice that the y-axes are different between these 3 graphs. Strawberries in general were quite a bit more infested in these samples. You can see there's a little bit more parasitism, but still overall the parasitoids are contributing very little to killing spotted wing within these crop fields. There's a lot of ideas to how this could be that we'll need to look at. It could be my favored hypothesis is that the frequent picking of the berries that's happening in these fields doesn't give the parasitoids time to attack them. It could also be, but we don't have any evidence for this, that the insecticidal management strategies for spotted wing could be having an effect on the parasitoids, but we don't know that yet. This is just to show you that less than 5% of spotted wing within crop fields are parasitized, but the reason that we know that it's probably something about the crop field itself and not the area that the crop field is in is if you go next to the crop fields in the hedgerows where these weedy Himalayan blackberries are growing, the parasitism levels of spotted wing Drosophila are much higher. On average, you know, among our 3 grower sites, it was, you know, between 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 spotted wing Drosophila were killed in these hedgerows. You can see that spotted wing is still emerging. These parasitoids never kill all the spotted wing in a given area. And so they're basically taking the edge off. But going back to Howard's talk, these parasitoids are killing here in these Himalayan blackberries alongside crop fields. They're killing spotted wing Drosophila that would go on to overwinter. And then after some of them die from overwintering mortality, they would be the starter population for the next year in that area, right? So these parasitoids are basically reducing the overwintering load of spotted wing Drosophila that will start out in that same landscape the next year. And Howard also mentioned how during harsher winters, we usually get a later buildup of spotted wing Drosophila populations. So you can think of these parasitoids acting in these late season non-crop hosts. They're almost like they're making the winter harsher for spotted wing Drosophila in the sense that more of the population's dying during that period because of this consistent pressure, now also from natural enemies. So I'm going to just summarize our findings very, very quickly. These 2 Asian species of parasitoid wasps were present at all surveyed sites in the lower mainland Fraser Valley of BC. This is new, at least within the last 3 years or so, although we don't know exactly when they arrived. Some good news is that both parasitoids are attacking spotted wing Drosophila on almost every species of fruiting plant that we surveyed. They do it all season long, from June to September, although we have the highest parasitism levels in mid-season. The parasitoids killed a much higher percentage of spotted wing Drosophila in unmanaged habitats than in crop fields, but this is okay because this is what we expected these parasitoids to do. We never really expected them to manage spotted wing within crop fields. And anyway, by the time they've parasitized a spotted wing in a blueberry field or a cherry field, for example, the damage is already done by the larva. So what we really want these parasitoids to be doing are killing flies in natural habitats so that they don't, not as many move into the crop fields. Okay, so this is reiterating the point that I just made. If we're sort of predicting what we might hope for spotted wing Drosophila management going forward with these new parasitoids, we hope that if parasitoids are killing enough of the pest in natural habitats to reduce their populations in late fall and early spring, this could delay their buildup in the season. Some of the earlier season fruiting varieties of our crops might escape some of that spotted wing pressure, and hopefully, you know, if we can track the populations and show that they're building up later, maybe we could hold off on some of the insecticide applications earlier in the season. But we would need to keep an eye on the populations to know whether that's justified. And then sort of on a landscape-wide level, again, they're taking the edge off all of these spotted wing populations in, you know, mid-season fruiting plants, in crop fields where people don't do great post-harvest cleanup. We can imagine in these drop fruits, the parasitoids are helping, again, take the edge off of the number of spotted wing that are emerging out of these dropped fruit and fields post-harvest. So I think we should also look at, we could also look at the role these parasitoids might be playing in post-harvest cleanups. In terms of where we go from here, I'm really interested to see now what's going to happen with our spotted wing Drosophila populations out here on the coast. Are we going to now start to see a decline? You know, we're only a year or two in, so we need to give these parasitoids time to do their thing. Hopefully we'll see a reduction in populations or a delay in the spring buildup. We obviously need to track their spread. we're already looking at, we need to understand, this is a key theme in pest management, we need to understand what makes these organisms tick in order to really harness their power to help us manage the pest. So hopefully we can figure out landscape or farm level management strategies that'll help these natural enemies help us in the coming years. For example, we find that they really like nectar producing flowering plants later in the year. So this is one of the things especially that Dr. Julie Carrillo's group at UBC is going to be looking into. The take home that I want you to have is that there's actually, I don't get to say this much as an invasive species researcher, but there's good news. There's 2 new allies in the battle against spotted-winged Drosophila in BC, but for now it seems only in the lower mainland, this Ronin wasp and the Samba wasp. And as Chandra said, they don't appear to be in the interior of BC yet, but we'll be looking out for them and also doing that safety and efficacy work that Chandra talked about to get a handle on how these parasitoids should be used. And thank you for your time. And Chandra and I and Pierre, I guess, can answer questions sort of for the ensemble of all 3 of our presentations now. Oh, and thank you to everybody on this slide. And funding and land use and everything. Thank you.